The first order of business was to check out Yankee Clipper's systems, and as soon as Apollo 12 reached orbit, Conrad put his crew to work. Dick Gordon went down in the lower equipment bay, sweating through an effort to realign Yankee Clipper's navigation platform with the stars. He kept talking to Bean, saying, "I don't see anything, Al." And for a while he wondered, what happened to the stars? Finally he realized he had not given his eyes a chance to adapt to darkness. Bean, consulting the star chart, told him, "You ought to be seeing the constellation Orion." And sure enough, there it was in the telescope, with brilliance, Sirius. Gordon made the alignment with little time to spare. During breaks in the work, Conrad and Gordon gave Bean a guided tour of Earth orbit. "Here comes sunrise, Al," they said, or "Hey, there's an island down there." And then in darkness over Africa, "Look down there, those are campfires." And he looked up from his checklist to witness the most amazing sights of his life. But for Bean, as well as his veteran crewmates, the lightning strike had been just as memorable. "That'll give them something to write about tonight," said Conrad, thinking of the press. "I'll bet your wife, mine, Al's wife, fainted dead away." Gordon said, "I bet they did when you started calling out about 18 lights." "Every time I close my eyes," Conrad said, "all I see are those lights." For Conrad, Gordon, and Bean, the launch of Apollo 12 had already become a sea story they would tell again and again for the rest of their lives. To their relief, everything on the command module and the lander, which was undergoing scrutiny in Houston, seemed to be checking out perfectly. At 2 hours, 28 minutes, Jerry Carr radioed the message they'd been waiting for. "Apollo 12, the good word is your go for TLI." "Whoop-de-doo," crowed Conrad. "We're ready. We didn't expect anything else." What Mission Control did not tell Conrad was that they feared the lightning had damaged the pyrotechnic system used to deploy the command module parachutes. Chris Kraft and Houston had conferred with other NASA managers at the Cape, and they decided to continue the mission. The rationale was simple. Conrad and his crew would be just as dead if the parachutes didn't work now as they would after coming back from the moon 10 days from now. Minutes later, Conrad, Gordon, and Bean were strapped in, waiting for the third stage to relight. When it did, all three men felt it rumbling away, speeding them out of Earth orbit. Conrad said, "Al, Bean, you're on your way to the moon." "Yeah," Bean replied. "Y'all can come along if you like." There was a picture on the wall of Dick Gordon's study in Nassau Bay, a signed photograph of a young, flight-suited Pete Conrad with a bit more hair, posing next to a Phantom jet. Conrad was about to leave Miramar Naval Air Station in San Diego to report to his new job as an astronaut. By the time that photograph was taken, Conrad and Gordon had become best of friends. They had shared the snap of the catapult on the deck of the Carrier Ranger, where they had roomed together and flown missions with their squadron. Their friendship was cemented in weeks at sea and in the night spots of San Diego. And in the summer of 1962, they had shared the hope of making it into the second astronaut selection. Gordon didn't find out that Pete had succeeded until the public announcement in the middle of September. Soon after, Gordon got a letter from Robert Gilruth, the director of the Manned Spacecraft Center, saying that he was sorry, but although his qualifications had been excellent, ... Gordon's feelings could not have been more divided, joyful that Pete had made it, heartbroken that he wasn't going with him. Maybe Pete was just being his optimistic self, or maybe he had a premonition of how things someday would turn out. But when he gave Gordon that portrait, he wrote in it, to Dick until we serve together again. By the time Conrad and Gordon lifted off in November of 1966, they already had enough stories to last a long time, and there were more waiting for them in Earth orbit. An hour and a half after launch, Conrad and Gordon shared the triumph of the first one-orbit rendezvous and docked with an Agena target rocket. A day later, Gordon climbed outside Gemini 11, trailing a 30-foot umbilical, and faced the most dangerous experience of his life. His assignment was to attach a Dacron tether from the Agena to the nose of the Gemini in preparation for a later experiment. But his body kept floating off of the Gemini, and with no means of anchoring himself, he worked so hard that he overloaded the cooling system in his suit. By the time he had attached the tether, his heart rate had reached 180 beats per minute. His breathing was heavy, his eyes stung with perspiration. Inside Gemini 11, Conrad was gripped with concern for his partner. He knew that if Gordon became incapacitated, there would be no way to pull the man in his present pressurized suit back into the tiny cabin. Conrad would have no choice but to cut him loose and go back without him. Unwilling to order his co-pilot back inside, he waited, hoping Gordon would make that decision on his own. Conrad would remember those moments as the scariest he had ever experienced in spaceflight, and that included the lightning strike on Apollo 12. But the flight also had its funny moments. On the third day, Gordon took a second, much more leisurely spacewalk. This time he merely stood up in the hatch and shot astronomical photographs. During a lull as Gemini 11 drifted in daylight over the Atlantic, Conrad fell asleep, his arms sticking out in front of him in his pressurized spacesuit. He awoke with a start and said to Gordon, "Hey, Dick, would you believe I actually fell asleep?" To which Gordon answered, What? He'd been asleep too, standing in the void, whizzing around the world at 17,000 miles an hour. When Pete Conrad moved on to Apollo, there was no question that Gordon would come with him. Under other circumstances, the two men might have landed on the moon together, but Deke Slayton had a rule: the command module pilots, like commanders, had to be veterans of space rendezvous. But the lunar module pilot seat could be filled by a rookie, and Pete Conrad knew just who that rookie should be. From the very beginning, Alan Bean saw the world differently from other test pilots. Long before he ever flew as a boy in Fort Worth, Texas, he was captivated by the beauty of the airplane in motion. In the summer of 1956, the 24-year-old Bean, thin and bright-eyed with the well-toned body of a college gymnast, arrived at Jacksonville Naval Air Station. He was the youngest and newest member of Attack Squadron VA-44. In a group photo taken sometime afterward, two things about Bean stand out: his ear-to-ear grin and his tie, which is almost the only one that's perfectly straight. Even as a squadron pilot, Bean's sense of aesthetics was very much intact. He longed to fly the best-looking planes like the sleek F-8U fighter. Unlike the other pilots who spent their free time fixing up old cars, Bean took night classes in oil painting. Bean had always been a bit of a loner, but he felt close to the flyers in VA-44.